Welcome to Carrying the Banner, a travelogue through the itinerary of the national tour of Newsies the Musical. I'm your host, Andrew Wilson, and I'm thrilled to bring you along as we travel city to city, offering insights from life on the road, travel recommendations, and some of the highs and lows of performing Newsies night after night, 8 shows per week for 2 years across 65 North American cities. So sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode. Hello, everyone. I gotta say, I'm actually really nervous to be hosting this podcast. I've had the idea of doing a travelogue podcast through the cities of the Newsies tour for a really long time, but I've always found a reason to put off doing it. Recently, however, my friend Jen LaForge had shared something on her Instagram feed that really spoke to me. The post mentioned that creative people procrastinate when they take their ideas too seriously. When we take our ideas and place them on a pedestal, we make them very, very important and put a lot of pressure on them, therefore making them all the more intimidating. So she recommends, in order to overcome this, start by taking your ideas down from that perfection pedestal and tell yourself, it's not that serious and it's not that deep. It can be so important and meaningful to you, and simultaneously, it's not that deep. So, with that in mind, I'm finally throwing caution to the wind and doing it. And yes, my audio quality will not be great. Maybe I'll meander and bore you all to tears, and maybe I'll be the only person that ever listens to this. But it's not that serious, right? Today's episode is going to be a very unique and special one. Not only are we going to cover what it is like auditioning and rehearsing Newsies the Musical in New York City, but also because we have an incredible first guest. You may know him as Buttons from the live film capture of Newsies on Disney Plus, but I know him as my very first friend on the entire tour. Welcome to the podcast, Chaz Wolcott. Hi,
Hi,
Chaz.
Andrew. Hi.
Thank you so much for doing this. Before we get started, I'd love for the listeners to get to know you. So, if you wouldn't mind telling us just a few bullet points where you're from, where you trained in dance or theater, and what you've been up to recently.
Yeah, I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio, moved to Las Vegas when I was in middle school. I trained in both those places in dance and theater. I went to Oklahoma City University for my bachelor's degree. And ever since graduating from college, I've been like a New York City theater maker, in and out of the city, performing at first. And then I kind of transitioned over to choreographing and directing. And I'm also a college professor now.
Yes. I also want to say, as dancers, we often on weekends will judge dance competitions. And every time I'm in Columbus, Ohio, the amazing Pinnell Dance Studio, is that where you trained as well?
Yep. Pinnell
Yeah,
Dance Center. Yes.
they're amazing. I always see when you go back and post there. As I mentioned earlier, though, this episode is going to be unlike future episodes, which will be a bit more focused on travel and tour life. But we have to start from the very beginning. So I would love to hear a bit about how Newsies first came into your life, maybe watching the original movie or seeing the show.
Oh my goodness. Well, I think like many people in our age bracket, I saw Newsies when I was a young kid. I think it came out when I was, under 5. And I wanted to be a dancer even when I was little. My parents were swing dancers and they kind of taught me how to dance when I was in diapers. And that was one of the first examples, especially modern day examples of guys dancing on film, right? That was one of the biggest like male dominated movies that had dancing in it ever. And so seeing that was a huge inspiration to little Chaz. And everybody, we all danced to songs from Newsies. And for the longest time, it was just like this huge source of inspiration. And then when the show came to be, which I think was completely predictable for anyone who loved the movie. It's so great. It's such a wonderful story. And of course, it would make a great musical. But it took a long time for them to develop it as a musical. And they finally did. And of course, everyone I knew was like, oh, you'd be so good for Newsies, And so, as I'm sure they said to you as well. And I auditioned for it many times. I think we'll get into that in a minute.
Yeah, we're going to get into the audition story. I want to ask you this, Chaz. I know, so I started dance very late in life. I was a competitive gymnast as a kid, but my intro to the movie was my sister had done a adagio to King of New York at our dance studio in Grove City, Pennsylvania. And I want to say, yes, I think so. It was like 4 couples anyway.
Amazing.
But I want to say that
I actually feel like it's the competition dance circuit that actually kept Newsies alive in the 90s. People
Oh, for
love to
sure.
claim X, Y, and Z things, but I really do think it was dance studios first and then show choirs.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, everyone I know did a dance to King of New York when they were a kid, and a lot of us did dances to Seize the Day, and I mean, it was like it was so popular, and this is the '90s, and it was a it. People say the movie was a flop, but it really like maybe a box office flop potentially, but it really was like culturally very significant. I feel like a lot of
Yes.
people in my generation it's like top. One of our top favorite movies. Is it a little cheesy? Sure. But it's a great movie, and the music is so perfect. It's so well written, and I think I completely agree with you. As a competition kid myself, I proudly say that I think we kept the album selling copies for years and years and years.
Now, Chaz, you are no stranger to tour life because you, I know, were Mr. Mistopheles on the national tour of Cats. For how long did you do that tour?
About 2 years.
That's awesome.
Yes,
Now,
a lot of.
I was also on that tour, but I did it in
Mhm.
2006, 2007, which was quote unquote the 25th anniversary tour, which I think Troika Entertainment stretched for like 4 years. But what years did you do it?
I did it from 2010 to 2012, and I was on the 30th anniversary tour. So there you
Oh
go.
my goodness.
And we
Wow.
actually closed the show. We were the last tour that went out before they revived it on Broadway.
Now, I have heard on different podcasts and in readings that we were called Cats Tour 5, which essentially means to our listeners that it was the fifth time that a national touring company was launched. However, with Newsies, we were called the first national tour. Chaz, could you explain a bit about what that means?
So we were the very first company to perform, the official Disney production outside of Broadway. So we were the first tour that went out from New York. We essentially used the same production as they did on Broadway. We used there was a few adjustments, and in our particular show, we actually added a song, which is pretty rare. So yeah, we were the very first company to do the show outside of New York City, which is super exciting.
It was really cool. I remember during bows, there's a part where we all say Newsies of New York. And do you
Mm-hmm.
remember we were trying an attempt to say the different city every
Yes,
time? And then
yes.
they were like, no, you can't say it. Newsies of Philadelphia.
Yeah, Newsies. I was Schenectady. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
remember for sure.
So let's time travel. So it's spring of 2014. Auditions are happening for the original company of the Newsies' first national tour. To give our audience a bit of a look inside into what that process was like, it began with either seeing the audition posting online or perhaps, like, if you had an agent, they would have submitted you. But regardless, you walk into a waiting room to give the casting team your headshot and resume. And Chaz, I don't know if you remember this, but like you and I are around the same age. And this was my first time walking to an audition holding room where there was teenagers with their parents like chaperoning them. Do you remember that?
Absolutely. Yes. And I've never felt older in my entire life than walking
Right.
into and seeing multiple like moms waiting with their kid,
Yes.
sitting in there like doodling or whatever they were doing while the kid was auditioning. And you're like, oh my goodness, it felt like
Oh
a
my,
summer camp or something. It was very unique to Newsies that would happen.
yes, very unique. Okay, so we're in the waiting room and you're pretty much assigned, a number or an audition group. And when it's your group's turn, you proceed into the audition room. And the first person anyone who has ever been an ensemble dancer in Newsies comes in contact with da 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 Lou Castro. Now, for some context, as Chaz knows, Lou was Christopher Gattelli's associate choreographer. This was Christopher Gattelli's baby. He won the Tony Award for Best Choreographer for this, but Lou really was like the keeper of that magic. Chaz, how would you describe Lou to our listeners?
I would describe him as a powerhouse in all the ways you could describe that word. So he is both amazing, strong, but intimidating, right? He is
Yes.
such a powerhouse human being that he is both inspiring and extremely intimidating at the same time.
Yes, I like to call him the Oracle. An
Yes, yes,
oracle with a cowbell. I don't know if you remember, he always had a cowbell that
yes.
matched whatever emotion he was going through. But
Hmm.
really, like you were saying, an eye for energy. I remember his famous quote to us was always, "Newsies are either low to the ground or flying through the air. There is no
Yeah.
in between," which really was kind of the charging force for, I would say, the choreography of our show. But so back to the audition. So we walk into the room, and the main audition combo for the show was a combination of four main moments from Seize the Day, all mashed together. So it was military into the double tour, into Dance for Your Life, into finishing with the Ron Versailles double inside turn. And then once you get past that round, you might do a second dance cut, which was tapping, the build up section into All Skate from King of New York, or you might go straight to singing your 16 bar cut. Now, for many dancers, this can be a very scary part of the process. And I advise all dancers, and I'm speaking to the vocal part, even ones who maybe necessarily don't want to be involved in theater, you never know where a dance career can lead you. To learn, it's really important to just have a 16 bar cut, which is essentially a verse and a chorus of a song that you feel comfortable singing. Chaz, what's your go-to 16 bar cut?
Oh, yeah. Oh boy. I mean, for this show, I think I always sang Proud of Your Boy from Aladdin just because it's a similar style. But that's one of the ones. I don't have very clever 16 bar cuts. What about you? Do you have a good 16 bar cut?
My senior dance solo was to Moon Dance by Van
Oh,
Morrison. So it was just always the thing I was comfortable with.
yeah.
So to this day, if they're like, hey, can you put together something? It's always Moon Dance by Van Morrison.
I
But
love that. Okay.
anyway, so back to the room. So the creative team then makes some decisions, and eventually we both got emails to attend the final audition dates. And I had to look this up. This was April 21st and 22nd, 2014, so over
Oh
10
yeah.
years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So now for the final callback, we were given several different sides or scenes to memorize. It was a scene from Carrying the Banner, The World Will Know, King of New York, in which you just read every single newsy part.
Right.
And
All the
right,
lines.
all of them. And three songs, which were the final chorus of Carrying the Banner, Most of Brooklyn's Here, and then the end of Once and For All. So when Alan Menken, I know, was writing this score, he purposely bumped up all the notes or keys. I'm not a musician, so I don't know the technical term, but to make us sound as young and youthful as possible. Which
Mm-hmm.
I swear it's literally still the highest thing I've ever sung, sustained.
Yes.
I don't know where you were in the tower placement for Once and For All, but I can still remember hearing Jack Sipple literally belting, "There's change coming!"
Oh yeah.
Like it was
So
amazing. He
yeah.
was probably the entire vocal stamina of that finale for us.
Yes.
Um, but so Chaz, I know you really have gotten into directing and choreographing. Approximately how many shows would you say you've directed and choreographed recently?
Probably between 20 and 30, maybe 40. I don't know. So
Yeah.
they keep accumulating very quickly, Andrew. So
And to be able to do both, it's truly wild because, as you know, when you're rehearsing a musical, often the dance team is in one room while the director is with the principals in the other. And to do both and juggling that is just like we all deserve to send you bottles of wine and coffee.
that's
Um,
exactly why I love it, though. I love the challenge of it. I love coming home and being exhausted from artistically working hard all day. So that's my dream is to work. So I don't like being bored in a creative process at all. I want more of a challenge. So doing
yeah.
both jobs is my mother will always remind me that you're doing the job of two people, because I'll be like, I don't know why I'm
Yes.
so stressed. And she's like, because two people are supposed to do your job, when you direct and choreograph, it's really the equivalent of two different human beings. But it's such a challenge. I'm a thrill seeker in that way. I like to be challenged.
Right. Now we've given our 16 bar cuts,
Right.
and proud of your boy in Moon Dance. But do you have any advice for dancers approaching the acting portion of that trifecta audition?
Oh, yes. I mean, it comes into even in the dance portion, right? So I think that I always say, I can teach you the dance steps. If I can see that you are getting most of them, but maybe there's something tripping you up or something, I can teach you those in rehearsal. We have, weeks of rehearsal, right? But
Mhm.
if you have no acting instinct or no ability to storytell with your face, or your body, I think that is a red flag for me. I want to see that right away because I don't know that I can teach you that. A lot of dancers have never really done plays or musicals where they have to tell a story all the time. And so I have to see, especially if you're a great dancer, I have to make sure that you can storytell with your dancing. And, there's lots of times in Newsies, for instance, that we're on stage not dancing, right? There's a lot of scenes that we're in, and you want to have engaged actors in those scenes that are helping to further the story along, not just dancers that are taking a break from the dance numbers, right? So I think you have to show that in your audition, in your singing and callback, in your dance auditions. You have to show that you are committed to the story, right? They usually talked about Pulitzer being on the 12th floor across the street. I need to see your focus up there the whole time. I need to see you trying to intimidate this really powerful man. If I see you stressed, looking in the mirror and trying to count the dance, that tells me that you're not focused on the story, and the story has to come first.
Right. And I would say too, to add on to that, I had heard this advice a while ago that was when you're memorizing your lines for an audition, memorize them like plain toast. Like do not add any affectation, literally just learn them with no emotion so that you don't get stuck in a rut of saying a line in a certain emotional way, which could sometimes maybe not align with the director's view
Right.
of the
Vision.
story.
Yeah.
Because often I'm sure you do, like you throw a little acting note to them to see if they can change it. And if they keep saying, you hiked up the price, like the same way every single time, that was a horrible example. Thanks, Shane and Younce. But you know what I'm saying? Like, it's best to do the base level as a very vanilla version, and then you can layer the story on top.
Yeah. Or, I mean, if you do make a bold choice, just being willing to be flexible and change it, right? Sometimes people that make really bold choices, I will definitely give a different guy, like a different direction to, sometimes a bad direction. Sometimes I'll say, well, what if you said this line with kind of no passion? What if you're just passive, like something just to
Exactly.
see if
Yeah.
they'll take the note, right? And
Right.
then
And
they will.
sometimes that can be comedy gold too.
Yes. Oh, yeah, totally. And so, I think you just have to be willing to work and be flexible. Don't be so married to your choice that you can't try something new if you're offered a correction or a thought from the director.
So something that I have purposely left out of this audition scenario so far, but is very, very famous and a part of the Newsies world, is the special skills portion of an audition. Now, this happens in many auditions. You'll do the dance and they say, do you have any tumbling? Can you do the jump splits or whatever? But for Newsies, I would say it really was like watching our very own Cirque du Soleil show. Now,
Especially when you were there.
Hardly. But I remember, and this is why I say Chaz is my first friend on the tour. I remember sitting on the sides. We were at Pearl Studios, which for our listeners that don't live in New York is on like 36th and 8th Avenue,
Yep.
just north of Penn Station. And I remember sitting on the sides and hearing Chris Catelli very proudly call you up. Like you were definitely like Chaz, like you were called up and he handed you a newspaper. And everyone held their breath watching you do the paper turns. It was really incredible. Like literally everyone was watching you. Have you ever counted actually how many pirouettes you can do on the paper?
Oh my gosh, no. I mean, the paper is like both exciting and also the scariest thing ever to turn on. So sometimes you do more, sometimes you do a lot more than you planned because if you catch the right, groove of that newspaper, it really can help you get some extra turns in there. So yeah, that doesn't count though, because you've got a paper under you assisting you, you know what I mean? So
right. And something I say is Pearl Studios, love them. However, I feel like the flooring that they bought, it's like they went to Costco and they were like, do you have any dance flooring? And they were like, no, but we have this like pool liner. Yes. And so they're like, great, we'll buy it. And so either you are sticking so hard, like you have gum on the bottom of your shoes, or you are in socks and you are sliding everywhere. So also I'm sure that added to the paper turns. But yeah. I still remember like, because you and I are both W's, Wolcott and Wilson. You came and like sat down next to me afterwards. And I just said something along the lines of, like, wow, well, I can't wait to go watch the tour with you in it.
And and I turned to you and said the same thing. You're conveniently leaving out the fact that you yourself did an entire Cirque du Soleil show when at least I called this the Circus McGuirkus portion of the audition, where they would just have everyone do their best circus tricks, which were oftentimes a lot of tumbling. Your case, you are a world-class tumbler and gymnast, and you would do the most things I wouldn't even know the names of them still to this day, Andrew. I still don't know how you do it. And I think I said the same thing to you in response. I was shocked that you were talking to me because you had just given, a Simone Biles level Olympic routine in the audition room. Like it was easy. And I was in shock. So I think the respect was very mutual amongst us right away.
In my dreams, Simone Biles, who was also from Columbus, Ohio originally, Okay, so now it's the first week of May 2014, and the offers start going out for the cast. Do you remember getting that call or email?
Oh, yes, I do. Our lovely associate director, Ricky Hines, had put our casting director, Justin, up to pranking me. And my
Mm.
phone call was, and I still have the post-it note that I was taking notes on when they called. But he called and said, "Hey, Chaz, this is Justin from Telsey and Company. We just wanted to call you and thank you for your hard work this week. The casting team, everyone really loves seeing your work, and they wanted to offer you some feedback for the
Oh my God.
future." And I literally, like, my entire heart sank, right? Like,
Of
this was
course.
this was my seventh time auditioning for the show, and I had made it to the final callbacks multiple times and really kind of felt like this was the one. I felt really good about it. And so Justin's like saying he's going to give me feedback. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I didn't get it. They're going to give me feedback for the next time, for my eighth audition. And I
Oh
was,
my
I was
goodness.
immediately defeated. And he was like, yeah, the team is hoping maybe you can implement this feedback while you're on the first national tour of Newsies this fall. And I was like, wait, what? And then I just hear Ricky like giggling in the background. Apparently they were sitting there together and they just wanted to prank me. It was a little
Yes.
cruel, but it definitely they didn't carry it on for too long. It was like less than 20 seconds before they gave me the information. So had they gone a lot longer, I probably would have been crying. But no, it was amazing. Yeah, so it was quite. I definitely remember that phone call as probably the best offer call I've ever received in my life.
Isn't it funny? I like how much the casting director and the creative team is also such a part of telling you. Like,
Oh
it's just
yeah.
as exciting for them. I think it's really, really cool.
Yes. I imagine them sitting there just like, just
Of
so
course.
excited to be sure. I mean, here's the thing is this was our dream come true and they knew that. And so I think, I probably telegraphed to them that I would be so
Yes.
excited, right? And so they're
Yes.
like, oh, this one, let's get him.
And
And so
two
yeah.
and two quick shout outs. I want to say he's speaking to Ricky Hines, who was the associate director of Newsies, under Jeff Calhoun, who is another really and like a legend of dance and choreography. It was Jeff Calhoun, is Jeff Calhoun. But Ricky was also such an integral part of the audition process for us. And it's kind of a rare thing to have on the directing team someone who is also a choreographer, right?
Ah,
So
yeah.
like really knew how to like get emotion and acting beats out of dancers who are probably pretty petrified of having to say one of their first lines or build a character in the show. So I just
Mhm.
shout out to him for that.
All four
Um,
of them really are like,
yeah,
Jeff, Ricky,
Lou,
Chris,
Jeff,
and
yeah,
Lou are
yeah.
all, choreographers. And, so it was a very dance. The team had a lot of dance background, which I think was super necessary for Newsies.
Yeah, and I believe the story goes that Jeff Calhoun was offered to direct the show for Disney, and he had like a whole slate of choreographers to interview, and his very first one that he interviewed was Chris Gattelli, and I want to say he offered it to him on the spot or like canceled the rest of the appointment. There's some story like that where like those two clicked just right away, and the rest is history. But
I mean, Chris is the perfect. I mean, Chris Catelli's work is what I love about him is he choreographs so many different types of shows. Like I've seen
oh my
shows that he's
goodness,
choreographed that
yeah,
have very little dance in it, and then he
yeah.
obviously is won a Tony for Newsies, which is probably the hardest dance show there ever was. And so it's fascinating the spectrum at which he can create work. But he's just the most gentle and kind human being on top of being extremely talented. And he's just the perfect fit for such a demanding show because he knew how to make it look amazing, but also to treat us with respect and admire our talents and honor them and not kind of overwork us or hurt us. So he was the perfect choice.
Yeah, and something, I mean, so I was the dance captain and swing of the tour, right? So I was often at the very back of the theater watching. And something I started noticing with his work is that if you couldn't hear the lyrics or you couldn't see the pirouettes and the tumbling, if you actually just watched the formations of the choreography, it
Mm-hmm.
kind of also told the story. Like
Yep.
it was these individuals in the opening just like running around ragtag, and then all of a sudden the emergency happens, and slowly but surely they all start becoming very unified, and then literally become like an army marching towards the audience. You know, the
Yep.
the fight breaks out, and then King of New York Act 2 starts with them once again all over the place, very individual. and then slowly building back up to that army line in Once and For All coming down. So even just like patterns and placement, it's also like storytelling. It's very, very cool. But
And I remember Chris talking about things often coming at the audience, like directly at the audience, and that his goal was that the audience would sort of be like, pushed back in their seats, like blown away by what
oh
was happening.
yeah.
So a lot of choreography would move directly downstage, right at the audience, and it just kind of felt like the Newsies. It gave the Newsies such power, right? They were kind of overtaking the size of the space by not moving side to side or back, but they're moving forward. So it just kind of helped it feel like they were taking power. And he said, to honor the movie origins of this show, where they were dancing through the streets, you couldn't do that on the stage. But if we kept the Newsies kind of cycling forward, it kind of felt like we were in a cinematic experience. So I remember him talking about that, and I just thought it was so brilliant. And it is one of the things that makes the show so memorable, is you are constantly like sitting back in your seat, like, oh, wowed by what's happening on the stage.
And the live capture also really captured that cinematic approach. Now, I want to let the listeners know, you watch the show and you think, oh wow, there's all these people dancing and doing all these tricks. That stage is the size of like a postage stamp,
It's so
right?
small.
The
Yeah.
towers take up so much room. It is teeny. It's like, speaking of Simone Biles, it's like dancing on a balance beam. But
Yeah.
anyway, so back to the podcast there. So I remember being told, like, your job is on the line if you tell a single soul about your casting in this, because Disney, of course, wants to do these big casting announcements. Do you remember, like, they didn't even give us a specific date. It was just, we were cast, in the beginning of May, and it wasn't until September 4th, 4 months later, which, not being able to tell anyone that you're about to leave New York City for years,
Right.
it was crazy.
And that your dream came true, right?
Right. You're like,
it was
but
excruciating. Yes.
excruciating. And I remember, even typically they announced them like maybe on the first day of rehearsal. Nope, we had to wait like 3 days.
I think it was
in
the
or
second
something.
day. It was the second
Yeah.
day, because the first day we had a media training situation where they basically, remember,
Right.
they told us like, hey, your life's about to change tomorrow. If you want to like privatize your accounts or anything, now would be the
Yeah.
time.
And
Because
honestly,
Newsies had gained
Newsies,
such a fan following that they were just like, hey, just letting you know, tomorrow you'll have a lot of people starting to follow you and be excited. I remember that was such an interesting way of starting a process. I'd never had that happen before.
yeah. And I mean, I think Newsies really ushered in a whole new way of interacting between a show and the fans. Obviously, you and I were in Cats, which also has a huge fan base of people dressing up as cats coming to the show.
Right.
But there wasn't the internet really to link them as much. And for us, the fansies, I mean, my goodness, from the announcement day on, they have been such a part of our journey with the show.
Oh, for sure.
And I remember we were on like a 10-minute break, and you had already like taken a photo on a rooftop holding a newspaper, and that was your announcement. And it was like, oh my goodness, this is like a whole semester in marketing in one post of like, I had no idea. As you know, I'm terrible with social media. And so I was like, I have a lot to learn from these boys. Like, you had that just ready to go, and it was amazing.
I took that the day I got the offer. I went to a friend's apartment, had a rooftop that they had access to, and we went and I took pictures, like doing the fist in the air, and I like
Yeah.
made the post. They used to have a Newsies app, Newsies photo booth app, and I like used that to add the Newsies logo to it and stuff. I don't think that app exists anymore, but
Yeah.
it did at the time. And I just sat with that post for 4 months waiting to the day I could post it. I was just so excited, and it was the only person I really told was my mom. And so when my mom was in the city, she made me go to the Nederlander and take pictures in front of the Nederlander, but again, we couldn't post them for months and months and months. So
something I want to say really quick is, because you've mentioned her several times, a part of being on tour is you really become a family, and not just the cast, everyone's like parents and whatnot. And I will say, shout out to Susie Wolcott, who is such a part of that tour to all of us, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our momsies were very, big fansies themselves, and would join us in multiple cities around the country. I think my mom was one of the leaders, but there was definitely a few that were there a lot. That became sort of our, cast moms. They would take care of us and see us
We'll
through
do
different
a whole
stops.
episode devoted just to the momsies
Momsies,
and
yeah,
dadsies.
for
Yeah.
sure, yeah.
Okay,
Not to mention the ones that were touring with us. We had a few
right,
moms
I know
on
we
tour with
really did.
us.
Oh,
Yeah, so,
we're gonna have them on the show for sure.
yeah.
But so speaking, so it's September 2nd, first day of rehearsal. We are at the new 42nd Street Studios, right across from the New Amsterdam Theater, which is where Aladdin is right now. Um, Now, Chaz, what do you remember about walking in on that first day?
I was shaking. I was so nervous and so
Mhm.
excited. New 42 itself is sort of like where every Broadway show rehearses, and so
Oh
even
yeah.
just getting to go, you have to have nowadays you have to have a QR code to get it, it's very secure, and not just anybody can book a studio in there. And so it was very exciting to just be able, that was my first time going in there. So it was very exciting to just go in there. And I remember we had some really great sessions with the different creative teams. We did,
Yeah.
cast. We did. I just remember taking a selfie that appeared on Playbill like a few days
Yes.
later. I think, yeah.
Yes, I can picture it still. I think like
Yes, yeah.
Angela Grovey's in the center
Angela
of it.
Grovey's in it. Yep,
Yeah.
yep, for
I
sure.
remember like hardly being able to sleep that night before our first
Oh yeah.
day and having kind of like the first day of school, having like my khakis and my button-up shirt already laid out and pressed, and
Mhm.
waking up at obviously the crack of dawn and getting a coffee at PAX below New 42nd Street, and just like I was there way too early. But I distinctly remember though, and this is one of many things that Jeff Calhoun did, but he gave an incredibly inspiring speech to us. I think it's when he kind of penned his famous phrase for us, which was like, remember, these are the good times, cherish them. Like I remember he'd always say, these are the good times. You don't know it right now, but these are. But then, and you mentioned this before, but yes, also on that first or second day, we did Circus McGuirkus, which is
Mhm.
essentially that Cirque du Soleil thing we were talking about. It was essentially like Special Skills 2.0 because we were already cast, but then they really wanted to note like, what side do you do your switch leap on? Where, like,
Yep.
how are you doing these turns and blah, blah, blah.
I
And
also remember when we were in music rehearsal, and so what we people probably don't realize is we were all cast as Newsies. You were a swing, but the
Yeah.
people who were in the show every day were cast as Newsies, not as our individual characters. So I remember in
Yes.
one of those first few days of rehearsal, we did a music like in the round style King of New York, where each one of us sang the first like 8 lines of King of New York by ourselves, and then just like would
Yep.
cycle to the next person. So each person
It's like a
sang
hazing
that.
event.
It was kind of a hate. Oh my gosh, I've never been more nervous in my life than doing that in front of everybody, because that is not my entry point into musical theater. And so, but yeah, that was I remember that was one of the first few days too, which is very not many shows would do something like that, but I think it was very smart of them not to pre-plan the Newsies and
Yeah.
who they would play. And anytime I direct the show or choreograph the show, I always advocate for the same policy, because it's better to have the whole group in front of you and then just kind of figure out where people's personalities lie, than to try to like pre-cast it with people you've only seen in an audition. I think as long as you're like, okay, you all are going to be the Newsies, and we'll figure out who's who once we get going. But
Right,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Just going back really quick and then I'm going to come back to exactly what you're speaking of. I remember at Circus McGuirkus two very main things, and that was quiet, sweet, young. He was probably 18 years old, Josh Burridge, just like hardly making a whisper. And then at Circus McGuirkus, Chris would be like, "Can you do this perfectly? Can you do this perfect?" Like he
can literally
literally
do every single
outshone like
element.
everyone, and he's so quiet. And I think we all love Josh Burridge, but like that was one of my first memories of like he is like a silent killer.
He's like
And no
he's
ego.
like if you built a perfect dancer, gymnast, human, and then but he has no ego, right? So he
and
didn't
make him the kindest man alive.
And yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So he's just, oh my
Shout
gosh.
out to Gina Burridge.
Yeah, exactly.
Momsy.
The Burridge
But
family
also,
definitely knows how to raise him. Yeah,
and they take over Broadway. They're incredible.
Yes.
But my other second Circus McGuirkus was definitely Melissa Stedman, who was a fellow swing with me. Just getting up there, because we auditioned with mostly guys. I hadn't met Melissa before, and she gets up there and literally does this like Olympic balance beam routine, and we were all going nuts.
I don't think anyone
Um,
saw it coming from Melissa, who was
no, it was
Melissa was
amazing.
Melissa was covering Catherine and Meta and Hannah on the show. You know, like she was a swing who had to cover like these major principal characters. I don't think anyone expected her to whip out this like incredible gymnast situation. I mean, I was like
Yeah.
blown away. She's another one of those people who just is so talented in so many ways, and you just, you know, I never saw it coming.
And she's hilarious.
She's so funny.
Um, so just to give a little insight for our listeners who don't know about New 42, it's a really cool experience because, as you mentioned, there are so many shows rehearsing and being created on all those different, there's like, I don't know, 6 or 7 levels. And I remember, for historical context, Chris Catelli was doing our show, but also he was creating the soon to be Broadway show Amazing Grace, like on the
Mm-hmm.
floor above us or below us. So he would
Yes.
often dip in and out between Amazing Grace and Newsies. And also, I went by the other day, and I don't think it's there anymore, but when you're, on like the 5th floor and you look out over 42nd Street, directly across is Madame Tussauds Wax Museum. And
Mm-hmm.
there's this giant poster of Wax Whoopi Goldberg. And anytime I'd be in rehearsal and just being like, I'm terrible, I'm not good enough, I'm so stressed or whatever, I would just look at Wax Whoopi Goldberg.
Yeah, well, you can
She
always
got me
rely
through
on
it.
Wax Whoopi Goldberg.
You can always.
Yeah, I
Um,
do remember that, seeing that outside all the time. Yeah, she was like
yeah.
out a window or something. You could see
Yeah,
it
she
very
was
clearly. Yeah,
huge.
yeah,
She's a legend. So when we were cast in Newsies, obviously, I was cast as a swing, meaning that I cover in this show 18 ensemble tracks, which included Newsies, Oldsies, and Girlsies. But I remember, as you were saying, that none of you were cast as your role yet, and
right.
I just remember Ricky giving us some scene. I think it was the Delancey brother Jack Newsies scene in Carrying the Banner. And he would trade off John and Mike Ryan, John Hacker and Mike Ryan, who were the Delancey brothers who covered Jack. They switched off Jack. Stephen Hernandez, Josh Asor, and myself, the male swings, did the Delancey brothers. And you guys did that scene like 400 times,
So many times.
cast us so many things. And I remember every single time, whatever role Demarius Copes was cast in, we were on the floor laughing.
Right.
He
So
was the
funny.
one I was like, I don't know who he's going to be because he is so fun, just like effortlessly funny. He wound up being cast as Henry. And just anyway, it's just amazing. But was there any indication that you'd be Buttons, or was that a role you were like seeking out?
No, I mean, I feel like the Newsies, I don't know. I think what's really beautiful about the show is I think the actors can kind of add in a lot of backstory for each character. You know, Buttons has like a few lines, doesn't give you a lot to work with. But what I liked about it is Buttons' lines have some connective themes in them, which
Yes.
generally are about his hygiene.
Yeah.
Because he says something about, all I can catch is fleas, and then
And it was
uh,
brilliant. You really did. You like would scratch at like flea bites. And then
yes,
throughout the show, anytime your little ism was always scratching some little thing.
yep. Well, and that's what I was going to say is I like love kind of trying to find something in there to play with. So I appreciate Buttons having some hygiene issues. I hope I wasn't cast because I also had hygiene issues, but we'll leave that to history. I will say that about 20 months into doing the show, our lovely friend Sky Flaherty like
Sky.
kind of like snapped at me one day. We were like rehearsing something on stage, and he's like, Chaz, why are you always scratching? Like, why do you do that? And I was
Picture
like,
him saying
I was
this.
like, are you kidding? Like, I was like, are you going to figure this one out, Sky? And he really didn't figure it out. And he did not know for 20 months why I was always scratching my ear. And I said, well, because all I can catch is fleas and I'm last in line for the tub. And Sky looked at me like I was the most brilliant actor. He like was so impressed
I
by the
mean, it
fact
is
that that was
brilliant.
theme. It was just so funny that he had never caught on. I think everyone else like had figured out why I was doing that. But yeah, Sky
Yeah.
thought I had some kind of like personal, thing. So I was like, no, it's
Yeah.
a character choice.
And in
So,
that whole Newsies solo moment during the nuns, you are the very final one. So
mhm.
it also can be an easy one to miss, but you always are right there with all I can
Yeah.
catch is fleas.
And
Now,
I was
so
scratching
Jeff
the whole time.
scratching, yep,
Set up the line. You know what I mean? It's really important
eating your
dramaturgically.
eating your Nilla wafer.
Eating my Nilla wafer,
Because we
drinking
got
my
Nilla
fake
wafers, and
coffee.
there was the gluten-free like
Hmm.
donuts or something
Yeah,
for our
our
gluten-free
gluten free
friends.
friends. Yeah,
But anyway, so Jeff Calhoun, I just remember once everyone was kind of assigned their role, he had everyone go home and write a backstory, which is something I recommend for any job. Do you remember your backstory for Buttons at all?
I do. Yeah. I said that his name was John Eisenberg. Now, we were
Wow.
allowed to make this up.
Sounds like a
Um,
tennis player.
I found this. I went through that great book that they gave us, and I had found some great articles on the internet about real Newsies, and I found this picture of this boy named John Eisenberg he was probably about 12, and he had a little brother, and I was like, that's him, that's Buttons, and so that's where I based my story. But the story goes that he got the nickname Buttons because his mom was a seamstress, and he wanted to help her out as she had gotten sick, and he wanted to help her, so he learned how to sew on buttons. So when she was like making a dress or a shirt or whatever, he could sew on the buttons for her, and that's how he got his
Hmm.
name. Now, again, I just made that up. That's not official
That's so
Newsies lore,
sweet.
but
That
that was
makes
just
total
my
sense.
yeah, yeah. So because I was like, well, he's got to have some reason for naming, being named Buttons. But that's kind of the fun part is you can kind of a lot that's not given to us in the script, so you can kind of play with it and figure out why you want him to be named Buttons. I'm sure other people. Somebody asked me if I was named Buttons because I was always one of the like center or like highest fist in every button of every number, like every final picture of every number.
Wow.
And I was like, no, I don't think that makes sense.
That is knowing the
um,
show really
Yes,
well.
I didn't even realize that, but
Interesting.
apparently, yeah.
That's fascinating. I just remember I went home and I wrote the word Lafayette, like I named myself Lafayette
Yes, I
as the
remember
general
that.
newsie. And then I'm
Mhm.
pretty sure I just wrote, I have hives. I am so nervous. That was probably me the entire 6 months of the beginning of tour. Um, but anyway, so speaking of adding more context to the character, when Newsies was on Broadway, the role of Crutchy pretty much spent the entirety of Act Two after he got taken away by Snyder and at the end of Act One to his dressing room and literally like never came back until the very end.
Yeah, he
And
was
for
gone
our
for a long time.
tour, yeah, and for our tour, what was so cool was, yeah, Alan Menken and Jack Feldman, our beloved writers, wrote a brand new song called Letter from the Refuge. Give it a
Hmm.
listen. But I'll never forget Zachary Sale, I think he was also 16 at the time.
Yeah,
Another just
yeah, maybe
baby.
17. Yeah, he was definitely a baby.
So talented, so innocent and pure. That voice is so beautiful. But I remember they had been rehearsing it very separately in another room.
Yeah, it
And
was
then
like a
we got,
secret even from us.
yeah, it was a secret. And I remember Tom Schumacher, who's the president of Disney Theatricals, came in, Alan and Jack were there and we were doing the show and then they were going to perform this number. And now this was to perform it to see if it was going to make the cut or not. So
Yep.
not a lot, no pressure for Zach Sale.
Yeah.
Um, but like every single one of us had tears rolling down our eyes and it
Well,
was in, it just had to be in.
oh yeah. I mean, I think we all would have gone on strike if it hadn't been. The beautiful thing
Truly.
is, Crutchy didn't really get. We never. I think what was missing from the show, and I think they were so smart to realize this. What was missing from the show is the actual like how bad it was at the refuge. Like we heard about the
Oh
refuge, there was
yeah.
mentions of the refuge, but we weren't. We never got to see Crutchy in the refuge. The best we got were those drawings that would come up on the projections that would kind of show like three kids to a bed and vermin and whatever. But we never really got to see it. And so I think giving the so I'm an empath, and so immediately the first few phrases of the song start playing, and I have tears already. I'm like, oh my god,
Oh,
Archie,
I know.
But it's like so. I think it helps the show so much. It's so we needed that. We needed to see what was at stake. I think for all these kids and for Jack, like why was Jack kind of backing off? And it's because he didn't want Crutchy to have to endure anything worse than this already terrible thing. We needed to see that to kind of understand the next few plot points. I think. So
Yeah, I mean,
I think
I
it's a
can't
great
even
addition.
imagine the show without it.
I know,
Um,
you didn't realize it maybe, but once they added it, you're like, oh,
yeah.
that's what we wanted. Yeah,
And literally, it's one of those instances. I know sometimes people have this view that, like, oh, the touring production maybe isn't as high of quality or whatever as the Broadway production. But in our version, we were actually what, like 3 or 4 minutes longer than the Broadway production.
yeah, I guess that's
Not
yeah.
comparing, but just saying we were a little longer. But I remember, so the entire time during that number, he is like truly writing with a pencil on a piece of paper, this letter. And every time I looked at it, I started thinking, does anyone even do this anymore? It
Right.
really is also one of these relics of the past, like sitting down and writing a paper or a letter to
Hmm.
someone. And also tying in the fact that most kids today don't really know what a newspaper is. Like they hear that word and they know what it is, but a lot of people haven't touched one. And I don't know about you, but every time I would go teach a master class, like a Newsies master class, and do the paper dance, I could never find newspapers to buy. Like I
Right.
would go to 6 grocery stores and 5 pharmacies until I found 3 of them. Like,
Right. Right.
have you
Well,
ever struggled to find newspapers?
Well, I what I struggle with is when I'm teaching sort of like younger companies, like if I, I've worked on the show like 12 times now. So when I've taught younger actors the show or, directed or choreographed the show, I find that they don't really understand the meaning of dancing on the papers. And so I always have to liken it to if we went into the Apple store and threw iPads on the ground and started dancing on top of them, how like Apple would feel about that. It's
Yes.
the closest thing I can come up with because they're like, oh, who cares? We're just dancing on these stupid newspaper. I'm like, but that's their business. That mattered to the, and so we times have changed so much that it's hard to even imagine how that would have financial implications on Pulitzer. And that's like the big thing is they're taking his product and
Yep.
smashing it into the dirt. But it's hard for people who don't even really associate with newspapers to quite understand how important that might be, right? They're like, well, just find it online. You're like, well, not in
Yep. I'm gonna
1899.
take
You
my
couldn't.
iPad and throw it on the ground. Okay, so just to kind of maybe wrap up rehearsals a little bit for the
Yeah.
listeners, like, do you have like a favorite memory that really stuck out?
I have two. Can I share two, Andrew? Is that
Yeah.
okay? Okay.
Yeah.
So the first one is we had the privilege of having Kevin Carolyn as our Roosevelt, and he had done the show at every iteration. I think he ended up becoming the person who did the show more than anyone, I believe.
Mhm.
But he was so incredible. Nunzio as well. He's a
So
great,
warm.
yeah, so warm. And I guess at opening night of Paper Mill, the legend goes that he forgot the entire speech at the end of the show.
Yes, this
And
story. Yeah.
and he like when he says each
Uh,
each generation must at
each
the height of
generation.
its
Yeah, yeah,
power
yeah.
step aside and allow that whole thing. I guess he just forgot the whole thing. He just blinked and he's looking at all the newsies. He said he just had this moment of pride and like looking out over all these young guys looking up at him, and he just completely blanked. And he started just sharing, song quotes from the movie or from the
Yes.
show. So he's like,
Once and
watch
for
what
all,
happens once and
you're
for
gonna be
all. They're
kings
gonna
of New
kick.
York.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And I guess it was this like legendary joke. We obviously were not there for that, but
Right.
we heard about it. And so one of my like premier memories of the rehearsal process is when we were doing the read through, and some of these people who had done the show before like didn't really need to read the script; they knew it. But on that particular paragraph, Kevin like opened up his book and like very very obviously was like reading it word for word so he wouldn't mess up.
Yeah.
And the amazing Harvey Firestein like got up from his chair and went over and like signed that page, like because Kevin finally got it right or whatever. He's one of the best actors I've ever shared the stage with, so it is pretty rare for him to ever make a mistake. But they really let him have it on that one. And then the other one would be our Jack Kelly Dan DeLuca had like an emergency dental surgery or something in the
This
middle
is
of
my
rehearsal.
memory too.
Okay, yeah. Oh, sorry, I don't want to steal it. But
No, tell.
the amazing John Hacker,
John Hacker.
who is just incredible. I didn't even know my own lines at that point of rehearsal. I mean, it was like really early, and he did like an entire run through as Jack, and then also kind of
He had never even rehearsed it, I don't
he
think.
never rehearsed it, and he kind of also played his own self at times in the show because they wanted him to get his own track. So he like jumped in for Jack for like Jack moments. I've never seen anything as impressive, and I think everyone felt that way. I remember Jeff Calhoun, our director, making a big sort of proclamation about what a star John was afterwards because it was so inspired. I think it kind of lit a fire under all of us to go, wow, not only has he got his track down, but he already is ready to go on as Jack in rehearsals. And it actually was a really long time before he actually got to do a show as Jack. It was Miami, I remember, which was, I think, January. I mean, we'd been out for 3 or 4 months before Dan ever missed a show. And so, he had a long time before he actually got to do it in front of an audience, but we all got to see it in rehearsal. And he's not only an incredible Jack Kelly, but what a consummate professional to be ready like that and to show that his preparation, he was ready, even though he hadn't had rehearsal. He had somehow figured out the blocking and the tracking, and he was incredible. So that was really inspiring. I think those are my two standout memories.
I totally agree. It's one of those things you just wish the audience knew, like that moment. It was so definitive for me, like watching John Hacker step up to the plate. And of course, as you and I both know, he went on to make his Broadway debut in Jersey Boys, and he covered Frankie Valli. I got to see him
Me
play
too.
Frankie Valli. He is so talented, and I think he's
Yeah.
probably done that show 5,000 times since.
One of the most incredibly talented human beings I've ever
So
met in my life.
talented and
And
so
most
nice.
audiences saw him in a very small role as a Delancey
Yes,
brother on
and
the Newsies.
also we're gonna have
But
him on the show. But
oh yeah.
just a little thing about him too is we speak about momsies and whatever, but Taryn, his
Ah,
girlfriend at the
yes.
time, also was on tour with us and is also very much a part of Newsies tour memories.
Yes.
They got engaged on tour, and when we were in Los Angeles, I'm sure you'll remember him going on The Price is Right and winning.
Oh,
And using the grand prize as their like honeymoon, I think it was like
yep.
Switzerland or something. Just too funny.
That was another
Um,
very exciting day on Newsies tour. You should do
that
an
was
episode
very exciting.
just about The
Yes,
Price is Right. Yeah.
The Price is Right, Newsies edition. So this is also meant to be a travel podcast. Eventually, once we get past these first couple episodes, which are very
Yeah.
just the formative parts of putting a tour together, I would still love to talk about travel. And since we're in New York City for this, I just want to ask what, at the time in 2014, where were you living in New York City?
I was a Queens boy. I lived in Astoria. That was where I lived for about like 10 years or so. I really loved living out in Queens. So I was Astoria's here. I don't think that's a
Yes, a
song,
story.
but
I
it could have been.
wish. We were talking before we started recording that pretty much if you're a musical theater dancer, let's say, and you moved to New York City, at least in our era, it was you either moved to Washington Heights or you moved to Astoria.
Yeah, for sure.
And I was Washington Heights and you were Astoria.
Yeah, most people, and now a lot of people also live in like Hamilton Heights and Harlem
Right.
and Jersey. But I think, yeah, at the time it was definitely Washington. I first lived in Washington Heights and then moved out to Astoria. You
So if
usually
you're,
can't live in Midtown because the
I
prices are a little
know.
higher than we can
The
afford.
price is wrong. The price is wrong.
Yes.
So if you're a tourist in
Mhm.
Astoria,
Oh
what
yeah.
would be a favorite thing that you would tell them to do?
Oh, it's just Greek food. You gotta get some Greek food. It's a Greek neighborhood, and there's amazing. Like, I'm not a big seafood person. But there's a lot of great Greek seafood, but even just if you're not a seafood person, there's tons of great Greek restaurants. And then I love Astoria Park. It's like a mini version of
Oh,
Central
it's
Park,
so
and it
nice.
overlooks the water. It's so lovely.
Yeah, it really is
I
beautiful.
I highly recommend that. What about Heights? The Heights is so much more like hip and culturally eclectic.
Yeah. Well, I want to confirm something really quick too. When I was in Greece and they would say, "Oh, where are you from?" and I would say New York, they would go, "Oh, I have family in Astoria." Like truly,
Yeah,
it is
yeah.
just Greek USA. My absolute favorite thing to do if I was a tourist in Washington Heights is get on a bike or take a walk and you go along the Hudson River and underneath the George Washington Bridge there is this little red lighthouse.
Mm-hmm.
It's so cute. And you can go down there and bring a coffee and take photos and then make the trek back up and go across the bridge to New Jersey. It's spectacular. You arrive in lovely Fort Lee, New Jersey. And if you're on a bike and you hang a right, you can go down to the Palisades Parkway. It goes right along the river. And there's this little like cabin snack stand where you can get like wine and beer and stuff. And I remember during COVID, I did this 3 or 4 times a week. I would bike across George Washington Bridge, go to that little snack stand and just exist because that was quite a time, eh?
Yeah, it's quite a time. I was at Astoria Park almost every day with my dog just to, get out some physical energy and smell some nature because most of the
Yes.
time we were trapped in our apartments. So
We'll do the COVID episode next.
yeah.
In terms of theater in New York City, I know most just average tourists know about Broadway. But let's say we are expanding outside of Broadway. Is there any like experiences or theaters that you would recommend venturing out to?
Oh yeah. Well, I've always been a big Marla Mendel fan, so I would recommend seeing Titanic or the Big Gay Jamboree if you're an adult for the Big Gay
Have you seen
Jamboree.
Big Gay Jamboree yet?
I did just saw it last weekend. So much fun. A little, like I said, maybe a 21 plus show, but
Yeah.
Titanic is not the same. It's fantastic. They're both great, really funny, memorable, and exciting theater experiences. Also, there's so many great off Broadway shows and smaller like downtown shows. I think you can explore beyond just big Broadway shows. Obviously, Broadway shows are incredible and amazing, but there's also really great kind of smaller theater experiences in the city with amazing artists who are there's no talent change. It's just sometimes the venue is smaller and it's a more intimate space or whatever, but there's so much great work going on all over the city. I mean, there's just so much you can see in this city. It's amazing.
For me, I always tell people to get on the L train and get off at the Jefferson Avenue stop in Bushwick and go see a performance of Company XIV.
Yes.
Have
Yes.
you ever seen a show there?
Yes. So great. Yes.
Austin McCormick, just like star choreographer, he has curated these shows that are like the soundtrack is amazing. You walk in and there's literally like frankincense, incense burning everywhere. It smells all of the dance. So it's a contemporary dance burlesque pop opera Cirque du Soleil show, essentially.
Something for
Wouldn't
everybody.
you say that right? And you literally, the
Yes.
dancers are also the bartenders and the ushers, and they are like leading you to your seats in these opulent costumes. I just think Company XIV is so incredible. And then, of course, that whole area in Bushwick is just like full of bars and restaurants and coffee shops and
Yeah.
obsessed.
Such a great neighborhood to visit too.
Now, speaking of theater experiences, I read, I believe, on Instagram that you're choreographing for Jay Armstrong Johnson's I Put a Spell on You show this year. Can
Yes.
you give a little info on that? Sounds amazing.
Yeah, every year, Broadway's biggest Halloween party. It's called "I Put a Spell on You." It's derived from the Disney film Hocus Pocus and the Sanderson sisters. But the best part is it benefits the Ali Forney Center, which is an organization that helps LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness. So we're raising money for that awesome cause and bringing a lot of awesome Broadway folks together to do a fun little Halloween event. It's so awesome. That's coming up soon, and I love doing those kind of like benefit shows in the city. I think it is a chance for us to collaborate with people that we respect in the industry. I mean, I'm a big fan of so many of these people as performers and creators and stuff, and we get to raise money for something great. Andrew and I both have done a lot of stuff for Broadway Cares Equity
I was going to
Fights
say, you
AIDS.
have definitely choreographed so many Red Bucket Follies and Easter Bonnet numbers.
I
amazing.
think those events are amazing. If you're ever visiting New York City during a Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS event, I highly recommend going. They are the best of Broadway, not only performance wise, but just showing the heart of the performers and the creators behind Broadway shows. It shows people giving back and using their talents to raise money for something a very worthy cause. So I always love events like that. You can always have a great time and be well entertained and do something nice for the world,
For sure.
Yeah.
Now, if you're coming to New York City and you want to maybe take like a dance class or some movement classes, do you have any recommendations for places to go?
Yeah, I heard there's this great teacher named Andrew Wilson at Broadway Dance Center.
Behave.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've always been I love dance, and that's my kind of my outlet. Besides just being the thing that I do for a living, it's also how I, de-stress, etc. So I'm a big Broadway Dance Center, Steps on Broadway person, and there's also pop-up classes that happen all over the city. You can just kind of follow people on social media, and they'll post about them and stuff, and stuff like that. I love that. You probably have like more diverse choices in terms of taking class because you also do like gymnastic stuff. So what would you do?
I mean, I really do want to give a shout out to you teaching at Broadway Dance Center. You have truly like a cult following. It's like, oh, I'm a Chaz dancer. It's amazing. And also just the way you turn. Somehow you will have like the best dance in the world doing 7 pirouettes and you have fit in 12. But
silly.
Being just more acro minded, I really like the silks and like circus arts classes at Streb in William. Have you ever been to Streb in Williamsburg?
Yes, incredible.
It's so cool.
Salam is in that company, who's incredible. Yeah,
Felix.
Yes,
yes, we were. He was my Skimbleshanks.
Yep.
It's amazing, and also if you're interested at all in ever tumbling and being upside down, the adult open gymnastic classes at Chelsea Piers are really cool. You can literally just jump on a trampoline into the foam pit. It's really cool. And of course, Broadway Dance Center, where you and I both teach. Now, you know how obsessed I am with coffee shops. I would say that's definitely one of my things from tour. Do you have a personal favorite in the city you would send people to?
I'm actually not the best person for this because I'm kind of basic when it comes to coffee. But if you want to avoid the major chains, I'm always a fan of Ground Central on 8th Avenue. It's in the theater district, so it's like close to where most people stay. I think that's always a good one. I'm not as picky as you. You probably have a much better list of coffee shops.
Well, and Ground Central is great.
Blue Bottles, another good one.
Blue Bottle's very good. San Francisco chain.
See, I still like a chain. I'm not as good at the local shops.
Go local. I also like Ground Central because their cups say GC on them, and I always think of our beloved Jenny Claire. I have to give another Washington Heights shout out. My favorite coffee shop in New York City is called Five Flies. It's on 158th Street and Broadway. It's great. Super duper recommend.
Flies. Okay.
Okay, last question. So, since you and I have such a close connection to cats, I'm going to steal a question from one of my best friends, Stephen Tardick. Thanks, Stephen, for this. Are you more of an inside cat or an outside cat?
Oh boy. I feel like I am a cat that like is inside and outside. I feel like there's some cats that like go outside and like through a little caddy door, I guess what you would call. Because like I love lounging and like having, some rotting days, if you will. But I also I love an adventure and love to go explore and do things. I need a balance of both. I don't think I'm one or the other. Nothing's binary in the world, Andrew. You know what I mean?
Same. Listen, I always say like in terms of daily living, I'm such an inside cat. Like I do not want insects around me. I don't want to like have a yard that there's like snakes or anything of the sort. But on vacation, I am a total outside cat. Like,
oh, that makes sense.
I want to go hiking. I want to be, I went to India when we were on Newsies tour. People are like, Andrew Wilson, you literally hate bugs. Why are you going to these places? But I become an outside cat the second I hop on a plane.
Yeah.
But,
it's adventuring, right? Like that's what I mean. I think I like love the sense of adventure, but I really also love to cozy up at home.
Yes. Chaz, it has been so much fun chatting with you today and talking about our Newsies origins and the audition and rehearsal processes. Where, for our listeners, can they find you on social media?
My handles are Dancin' Chaz, DANCINCHAZ.
Yay. And you can find us at Newsies Podcast. I know. Well, thank you so much for tuning into the premiere episode of Carrying the Banner. We're going to have Chaz back for our next episode as well to talk all things teching the show during our time in Schenectady, New York, and Waterbury, Connecticut. So bye-bye. See you soon.
Yay.